Hiya. Well, if you're like me, you sometimes want to smash your phone with a hammer into little tiny pieces until little bits of plastic ping off the people next to you at work. Or maybe you just spend longer organising meetings than you're going to spend in the meeting anyway. All these things like this, communications is a pain, we know about that. Now, one of the things that the industry has been telling us for a few years is that unified communications can solve some of these problems. So in the next few of these sessions in the comfy chairs, look, World of Leather is completely out of stock, so don't try and buy ones like it. Then we're going to be discussing whether unified communications has a value, how you go about implementing it, and does it work. So we're starting off today with unified communications in context. Basically what you should be talking about when you're making the business case, everything you do before you go along and buy the stuff. Helping us today, we've got a cast of thousands today, so helping us today in the studio, from Microsoft, we have Steve Tassell. Steve, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, welcome, thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome to be here. And joining him as well from Dell, we've got Andy Simpkins.
Hi.
Okay, Andy, welcome as well. So that's the vendor end of the room. So we've also got a user today, and Darren Lloyd, you're from Newport City Homes, aren't you, Darren?
Yes.
What does Newport City Homes do?
Newport City Homes is one of the largest registered social landlords in Wales. We've been in operation now for about 12 months, started in March 2009, and it's our responsibility to provide accommodation to the tenants of Newport. We've taken over the housing stock previously with Newport City Council and set up as, like I said, a registered social landlord.
Excellent. And a committed unified communications fan as well, aren't you?
Definitely, definitely.
All right, we'll be finding more about why that's the case later on. And finally, helping me today on my left from our old mates Freeform Dynamics, Dale Vole. Dale, welcome.
Thank you, Tim.
You're going to have to, we're outnumbered today, you're going to have to give me a hand keeping people in order.
We'll see
All
how
right.
it goes.
Now, Dale, I'll start with you. Why the unified communications had a lot of hype. And whenever we discuss this at the Register, there are some people saying, I can't make a business case for it. And so this is what we're trying to solve in the next half an hour. Can everybody make a business case for unified communications?
I think one of the problems with unified communications is just the lack of clarity sometimes in terms of what it is and what it's about. And obviously, unless you have a good handle on that, it's impossible to even start to think about making a business case. And we've noticed, going around talking to various different vendors in this space, that some you get the impression it's all about video conferencing, others you get the impression it's all about telephony, others you get the impression it's about IM, instant messaging, or web conferencing or whatever.
What's the answer?
Well, the answer is it's about bringing all those things together. In fact, bringing your communications in general together. One of the things that we've done recently, for instance, is talk to the good old Reg readership, and what we hear back from them is that a lot of people are in a situation where they've accumulated all kinds of communication mechanisms over the years, and it's now a job in itself, as you alluded to at the beginning, just communicating with people. So if you think about the opposite of unification, it's fragmentation and disjoints, and that's kind of where a lot of people are right now. So unified comms is really all about bringing things together to avoid all of the issues and problems to do with that accumulated stuff that isn't particularly working well together at the moment.
Steve, if we'd have done something like this a few years ago, then we'd have had a couple of people from telecoms companies in. You know, here you are, you're Microsoft, you're not traditionally telephony. When people are talking about making a case for unified communications, it's an IT department job now?
Well, it often starts there because traditionally that's where the infrastructure is managed from, but ultimately the conversation really needs to include technology and the business. And classically, you know, the telephony vendors that you mentioned there tend to come from an infrastructure standpoint. Our heritage being more centred around the user, we absolutely understand their needs and their requirements, and really a successful unified communication project has to bring the business along as well and tap into some of that business need that unified communication can help solve.
What about people? What about businesses that have traditionally had some people who do the telecoms, the operations part, and some people who do the communications, the network in the IT department? Very often these guys are at loggerheads.
Absolutely, and we see the same thing as well. And traditionally, what we're seeing is a merging of those two functions, where telecoms is tending to move into become an IT function as well, because people are investing in things like voice over IP. They're naturally wanting to look at the convergence of voice into other forms of communication and collaboration, not just having voice as a separate function on its own. There's benefit to bringing that into the other ways that we communicate through email, through wikis, through blogs, whatever it might be, bringing that all into one place under the IT banner.
Andy, as if I'm correct, you came from a more traditional telephony background before you were in Dell.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so are the cultures still different?
I think it depends on the organisation. Sometimes, due to the actual size of the more traditional telephony, absolutely. Very isolated, very centric around functionality driven by the phone. Less concerned around what's happening on a data network. I think voice over IP started to change some of that. So there is at least some understanding that, data networks aren't going away. They're not, the big dark side of the world. But yeah, typically it's seen as being, this is my job, that's your job, and the two will never come together. And that's simply not true, because it should be much more user-centric than it should be technology.
Mm-hmm. Darren, from your point of view, give me an idea about the size and the scope of your project, first of all, because a lot of people think that Unified Communications is just a very big company project.
It doesn't need to be a big project at all. We've got about a 500 user base all using Unified Comms.
Are they all in the same place?
Scattered around 3 or 4 different business areas, 3 or 4 different sites. But it's very functional in a way that it's actually used and implemented within Newport City Homes. I think we're right in saying that a couple of years ago, even the industry didn't realise or know how to market Unified Comms. Recently, I think it's got more to grips with it. Difficulty being, it's always been very difficult to demonstrate it to an organisation what it can actually do. You need to actually get something into sort of like your chief officers or your user base and show them the functionality, because people don't understand what Presence can do and what IM can do. That functionality only comes out when you can actually show it in real terms.
You had a bit of luck, well, not really a bit of luck, but being a new organisation, you didn't have to rip out old stuff, but at the same time you still had to make that business case to your boss.
Oh, exactly. It was an interesting project from ground up. I mean, cabling right the way through to your data infrastructure and then UC. But UC was there really driven by the organisation and the processes that it was able to change. So it was there helping with the strategy, how we sort of like communicate with our customers, how we can improve that, how we can get the throughput of sort of our tenants through to our service centre, through speaking to the right person at the right time.
Okay, now we'll get to some of the details of what you did a little bit later, because it's quite interesting. But Dale, from your point of view, where do you see the value in Unified Communications today? Because it encompasses so many different things. It's sometimes quite hard to write a spreadsheet that's going to say we're going to save this much at the end of 12 months.
Before answering that question directly, I'll just add something to this, who needs to be involved, because one of the things that we picked up quite a bit is that in lots of organisations, and we talked about a greenfield situation there, but in other organisations, you've got users already using instant messaging, voice over IP, totally independently of the IT department, the telephony, whoever's running the telephony infrastructure, etc. So, let's not kid ourselves that there isn't a demand out there for new forms of communication. But coming back to your question, the problem is that with every new form of communication you introduce, whether it's users doing it off their own bat or the IT department or the networking guys introducing something, it introduces just another element of fragmentation. And the business case quite often is about just reducing the amount of time people need to spend to communicate with each other. And in doing that, it's important to recognise the context, because there's a couple of different kinds of scenarios you can think of. One of them, for instance, is around call them professional users or information workers or whatever. So it might be sales and marketing people in R&D, that kind of stuff. And there you've got fairly ad hoc communication going on, so people may not necessarily know who they need to who they're going to be talking to in a particular day. So having the communication working much more coherently just greases the wheels of professionals and teams working together. But then there are other situations where you've got more of maybe a process-centric situation where it's all about just streamlining business processes, whether it's in healthcare, manufacturing or whatever. There's lots of things that go on that have a kind of request-response element to them. And if that doesn't work well, you have periods of time when nothing's happening to move a job forward or to deal with an issue or whatever it happens to be.
Well, but that's interesting, Andy. If I can put this one to you, because you've had a lot of practical experience installing these, that very often people are told that unified communications is, by its nature, more efficient. Is it easy to work out where those efficiencies will come and how big they are?
I think, again, to Dale's point, it really depends on the processes that are in place for that particular role. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a call centre, that's a very mandated, very structured process. Whereas if you're a sales-oriented organisation, that's very ad hoc. So that's lots of people on the road, very, very often not in the office, still need to be contactable. And invariably or historically, that's been call them on a mobile phone or wait till they get in the office and various hundreds of voicemails to be responded to, so quite inefficient. The whole mechanism driven around unified communications means that there is one place you can look to see if, firstly, the person's available very quickly. You don't ring them first and then find out that actually they're busy, they're in a no-signal area, or they're in a meeting. Actually, now I can see that they are available and they're not available, and even if they are in a meeting, I can still drop them a quick note and get a response because actually I'm not disrupting what they're doing. So it's really driven around the kind of people, and within any organisation there's going to be various groups that fit within a defined usage pattern.
So don't have a one-size-fits-all across the organisation even?
Absolutely not. Is extremely varied. And the way that the various mechanisms are then used by those groups can also be very varied. So you'll find very high usage in people in one area, so sales, IM, because it's less intrusive, they can respond very quickly and it's done. Mm-hmm. For a call centre, that's very much more a voice reactive response because the callers or customers calling in need to speak to someone to get a response. And of course, they need to be efficient in actually dealing with the query, handing that off to someone with the knowledge that can actually respond. That's all about customer satisfaction. But the two overlap because I might be actually handing off to the sales organisation.
Steve, yeah, Dale.
Can I just say, I agree with you totally. There's a big spectrum of different considerations and scenarios, but from a business case point of view, it kind of tends to net out to either you're making a case around effectiveness. So, if we pick up on sales teams, for instance, it may be that I'm dealing with a particular situation. I can make a better decision. I could maybe improve that deal, or I could deal with a customer situation more effectively if I could just pick up the phone to one of my colleagues. If they're not available, or I can't track them down in time, then my decision is less effective, let's put it that way. Now, that can translate to all kinds of things: lost revenue, customer dissatisfaction, a missed opportunity of some kind, etc. So there are all kinds of scenarios around that in the sort of professional world. Over on the more process side, it tends to come down to cost savings, efficiency, reducing the amount of time that it takes to do things. So fundamentally, you end up with things like better use of resources, because you're more likely to be able to track down the most appropriate person. You're not having to have more people.
Don't try and measure everyone along the same scale.
Absolutely.
On this one. Steve, can I bring you in?
Well, I'll just add to this conversation, in terms of what we're seeing from a sort of generic cost-saving perspective. Customers particularly saving around travel and training. They're two key areas where really across the board you can look to cut costs, and you can absolutely measure the before and after of implementing a UC solution. So the example would be, you pay out X amount a year for putting people up in hotels and the sheer cost of just getting from A to B for a meeting. Well, when you could do that virtually, you could have a video conference instead. So you can absolutely measure the impact of that. And that's certainly an area that we see people looking first when they're looking to make a business case for UC.
Yeah,
there's definitely two ways to look at it. From a point of view of process-led, from sort of, as you mentioned earlier on, our customers, they call through. We want to treat them with respect, and we want them to get through to the right person at the right time. Previously, before we had Unified Comms, we'd have an agent in our resident service centre call a number, not knowing whether that person was going to be there. Try another person. We could have a resident on the line for 5 minutes before they actually get to leave a message, not even speak to somebody. Now we can set up the groups, and through sort of presence can see the availability. So once we know who that person and what department they need to speak to, we can contact a member of that department who's available at that point in time. So reducing the time that person's on the phone, increasing the image of Newport City Homes.
Is it important to break this down into real-life scenarios?
I think so, and the more that you actually start to see, once you start to implement it, processes come to you from the organisation which can be changed. You see a whole new world sort of open in front of you and think, right, well, I can actually see that person's availability now. All of a sudden, I can change the way that we work. And, you know, we have neighbourhood officers out there who we're looking to implement on their availability and their presence by the mobile phone. So even if they're out and about, a resident can get hold of them, you know, through calling our service centre. And sort of financial gains. I know people will be interested in that from an IT section. We haven't had to employ a separate telephony person because we've got our own server infrastructure officer and technical lead. He's been able to pick up the UC side of things very, very rapidly. Everything's done through Active Directory. So the money that we've actually saved on not employing an extra telephony person, we've employed a developer. Now, that developer has actually gone and created our CRM system for the customer service centre, which we would have paid £40,000 for. So we've got that saving there of £40,000, and we've got an extra sort of a person working in a development role, saving the organisation money, developing our products in-house.
So, you know, so you've gone with a standard platform for your unified communications. When you came into this, did you look at all the possible different ways of implementing it?
We looked at a number of vendors, yes. We looked at the Cisco route. We looked at Nortel originally because in my previous employment we'd had a Nortel Meridian solution, and we looked to put UC into that. But actually, as I said earlier, seeing that product in use sort of in a demo thing that Dell were able to do with Microsoft, it sold it to us because they were able to come down and sell it to our executive team, show them the functionality, show them how it all worked in a 30-minute period. Previously, in previous employment, I needed to sign up to sort of a try-you-buy type deal. So an implementation over a period of time, over a period of weeks and months, you know, and if we liked it, you know, then we did, you know, expand on that. With the Microsoft solution, they were able to come in the morning. I think you'd set up within an hour. We demonstrated it to the user base within 30 minutes.
So it literally came in and sort of plugged some wires in and
exactly.
Telephone started
and
ringing.
that's the most important thing, because I think we said earlier, presence information is a very difficult thing to sell. I mean, ultimately, it's a couple of green, red and sort of orange lights showing you availability. Explaining how that is going to bring benefit and change the processes is very, very difficult. If you actually see it in real terms, it opens people's eyes.
And Andy, so I'll get to you in a minute, Dale. Andy, one of the things about this that comes into it is that you sort of trust traditional telecoms vendors to be able to do whatever it is they do. Just get the phones ringing, just keep the network working. There's a little bit more of a credibility problem for network vendors, people with a background in PCs.
Indeed. Thanks for that. There is, I think, the power of being able to demonstrate something is purely driven out of it being based on commodity hardware. It's no longer any requirement for it to be proprietary. This is how it works. These are your options, and that's fixed.
Do you have to, though, take some kind of compromise, a little bit of hit in network reliability, though?
I don't think so. I think if it's planned accordingly and you take relevant steps, it is possible to actually give the same level of sustainability and credibility to the solution. And that's just around planning and measuring the expectations that the customer has in terms of what happens if there is a problem with the server that's running my telephony. And there's a lot of options that we have for that. Some things that are within product, and some things that with the current version may not be, but can be enhanced. The extensible platform feature set, which we've used right now, and developments coming in future versions, which would mean that those issues are no longer in existence. So,
no doubt I cut across you there because you had something you wanted to say from Darren's experience.
Well, I did, but actually just picking up on this point here, I think just the flip side of the telephony vendors versus the IT vendors approaching this. I've been tracking the UC market, Unified Comms market, as an analyst for about 4 years or so. And it's about 4 years ago that Cisco did its launch, for instance, in the UK. And what I was seeing in the first couple of years was a lot of kind of projects that were floundering because the functionality was brought in by the telecom side of the house, usually as a result of PBXs needing to be replaced.
And existing relationships that you have with the resellers, for example.
Exactly. So you needed to replace your telephony switch, and the sales guy said, oh, by the way, while you're doing that, why don't you have a bit of unified comms? All right, we'll have some of that, they say. But actually, it wasn't teed up in the right kind of way because you didn't have the stakeholder buy-in, you didn't think as much about the integration issues around applications, etc. Actually, since the software and the hardware guys have started to come in, the IT guys have started to come into the equation, we've seen much more rounded projects, so they're much more likely to meet business needs because the centre of gravity has shifted up the stack, as it were. So there's much more interaction with stakeholders quite naturally as a result of these things.
Steve, does it matter how big you go at the beginning? Can you start small and then add bits onto it? Is that a way that you would recommend?
There is no one way to approach this, but certainly we would recommend tightly defining the scope of a project such that you have maybe a certain segment of your organisation, maybe the structured task worker that we talked about, very process-centric operation. Where
it's easiest to make a case
exactly.
for that.
You can absolutely map onto that very easily and start there, prove the benefit in that part of the organisation and then look to broaden out to other areas. I mean, that's certainly a very good way, and most customers go down that route as opposed to the big bang, we'll roll this out to everyone.
You are going to have to make an investment in upgrading your network as well, aren't you?
Potentially. I think it depends on the customer very much. But certainly, there could be a situation, depending on what they're trying to do. If they're just simply trying to do messaging and presence, then you don't necessarily need a massive investment in a network to do that. If you want to do video conferencing, then potentially that's something that has to be looked at.
I think there's a danger initially when you go down these sort of like UC route is just implementing little small bits of it, because money sort of like within organisations is not available as freely as it was. And the danger is you'll have one bit and they'll say, brilliant, you've got that, and it'll be very difficult to get the other components to add onto it. Implementing the whole feature set, maybe in small parts, is probably the way to go from that point of view. So you've got the voice, so you've got the instant messaging, you've got the presence. That would be a better way to go from my point of view, from a customer point of view, I would think.
So you have something that does everything, but not necessarily for everybody.
Yeah.
That's true, and that certainly is supported by the research with the register readers, in that a full feature set actually gives you a big advantage in terms of seeing the benefits of Unified Comms. And those that have taken more of a piecemeal approach tended to struggle a lot more. This is from about 500 readers who came back with experiences of UC implementations. The other thing, though, is picking up on, you need to be selective, obviously, in terms of who you're going to pilot with or deploy to initially. But the other thing that came back from the Reg readers was it's important to understand the patterns of communication that take place. So if you're going to have this group at the centre of your initial deployment, which other groups do they routinely interact with on a day-to-day basis? So bring them into the initial rollout as well. Because if you don't, you're going to have a one-sided equation, so you'll only really see part of the benefit.
And I think from the past of these type of implementations as well, there's always been that sort of worry about bandwidth, which we touched on. You brought voice and data together, and there's always that concern that sort of like you get drop packets and things. We haven't noticed any of that with this implementation at all.
How much do you do with it? Do you do any video conferencing, for example?
We don't use a huge amount of video conferencing. The video conferencing is there, but it's mainly desktop sharing, file sharing, the presence. We do a lot of conferencing more on the audio side of things, but we haven't noticed any degradation in service. I mean, there's the sound quality on it is unbelievable.
I was going to say, simple things like call quality.
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic. And coming back again to the bandwidth available, we've got data and voice going across the same network, same subnet, without any quality of service. We haven't implemented quality of service. We haven't needed to. Working from home, I mean, I can use my laptop with the simple OCS client on a broadband connection, no VPN, and the sound quality on that is almost as if the guy's next to me. No worries there.
Andy, there's what a lot of people have at the moment is they're moving into an environment where working at home is natural, it's expected from people. Again, this taxes, it makes the case for unified communications, but it also taxes your ability to provide it.
It doesn't, because I think whatever is deployed, be it a Microsoft solution or another vendor's solution, actually what it comes down to is it really accessible, and to what extent do I have to change my current technology stacks in order to be able to present that. So if I want to have a larger group of people working from home, or even actually not working from home but having flexibility to work in a number of different office locations, then it becomes really important that it should be not so disruptive, should scale very comfortably, but should give me the same quality of service outside of the physical office boundaries. So, being able to use things over a 3G, for example, people expect that, okay? I think one of the things that we've maybe overlooked is, right now, it is very common for everyone at home to be running something like Messenger or Yahoo, Skype. Coming to a work environment that doesn't have that functionality becomes very frustrating. I want to have my conversation, I want to have it now. I can do this at home, why can't I do this in the office?
Well, so traditionally, and again, I've done webcasts here, where we've talked about things like Messenger and Skype in the workplace as little more than a virus, something to be taken out. And what we're really beginning to say now is this stuff exists. Yeah. It's going to exist in the company anyway. The best thing is to embrace it. Is that the shift we're making?
I think it's a realisation that actually it's not just a bunch of nice-to-haves, but actually there's real business benefit in delivering them. So the frustration being derived from I could do this at home but can't do it in the office is what drives the fact that some people in the office are using Messenger, they're running Skype, whether it's appropriate or not, is because, it's a question, why can't I have this? And simply saying that, the voice quality is not good enough, or it saturates the network, everybody's going to do video conferencing, which is normally the first concern, and therefore everything needs to be upgraded, simply doesn't happen, because people use it appropriately, because they're comfortable with the technology anyway.
The other thing I'd just add there, the other thing that we're seeing that's driving deployment is that experience in the consumer world of, if I have a Hotmail account, I can go and log on to Hotmail anywhere. I don't have to take a fixed device around with me. And you see really to sort of transcend not a fixed endpoint, but it can be on your mobile phone, it can be on just a browser in an internet cafe.
So people who come into the workplace in the last 5 years are expecting this, basically.
Exactly.
Can I just call time on this assumption that you don't have to worry too much about your network? And you haven't actually said that, but I think you could easily get the impression.
It's the way the conversation's been going, Dale.
And I think, true, most people who've gone down the unified communications route that we've spoken with have not had those problems, but most of them have actually paid attention and looked at their network and assessed their network.
It's a sort of a self-selecting group. The people who have taken care of their network are now thinking about unified communications.
But there are a number of people, not a huge number, but there are the horror stories you do get are people saying, we just had huge problems when we rolled it out because users complained about echoing on the line and all sorts of other latency problems and various other things. All functions of the network not really being up to it.
As with any new implementation of any new technology, whatever resources you actually leverage, they need to be measured and they need to be planned for. Absolutely.
So we're not saying it is a problem. It shouldn't be a problem, but it is a problem if you just make assumptions.
But what we're saying is it's not good to stick the stuff in and then think about what network you're doing for.
Absolutely not.
That's the thing we can all agree on.
The other thing to add there is we're talking very much about an on-premise solution or something that's delivered on-premise. The other option, of course, for some customers will be to look at cloud hosting. So, I don't want to invest in the infrastructure. I'm not an IT company as such. I have IT because I need to run my business that way. But actually, I'd rather pay for someone else to run that for me, whether that's Microsoft or a partner. And then, to a certain degree, you can, depending on what you're trying to do with UC, remove some of that issue.
That's interesting, because our research says particularly smaller businesses look to that route. I mean, we've looked at sort of 3 delivery models, really. One of them is the on-premise solution, where you manage it yourself. But actually, there are a lot of people that are up for managed services, so people who will put it in and look after it for them and do some of the initial...
It would seem strange if people are starting to do their traditional IT applications off-site in the cloud, however you like to put it, but then at the same time we're taking their telephony suddenly into the IT department.
And we talked about home working and mobile working, and I mean, it actually works quite well, particularly with a smaller business. If you've got distributed, guys out in the field, for instance, or working from home, it actually makes a lot more sense to have it in the cloud, arguably.
OK, we're about out of time on this. What I'm going to ask all of you to do is very, very quickly to sum up, not in 5 minutes, but in sort of like 10 seconds is what I'm looking for. The sort of priority, if when you're planning, on the planning stage, the priority thing that you really need to have under control. Who wants to start on this? Steve, you're nodding. So
I'll go first. The absolute key to this, as we've talked about earlier, is bringing the users along on the journey. It is more and more a business-led proposition. It's about addressing business requirement through UC. And you have to get your identified users, your different subgroups, on board from the very beginning, not just from the approach, the different working practice, but also the different endpoints and devices that they could potentially use.
Don't wait to show them it when it's already in.
No,
get them in beforehand. Andy, what about you?
So I would go for... of all of the people that have involvement, be it business side, technology side, usage side, we talked about the data networking and the telephony. Actually, all of those people have input because they're all valid. It's not about it being unified communications at the expense of much more traditionally telephony infrastructures. It's actually an amalgamation of all of those things, and all of those organisations or groups of people need to cooperate. And be fully aware of what the impact will be.
OK, Darren, your experience.
I think that's right. I think you do need to involve the users right from the outset. They're the people who are going to be using the system and sort of like dictate whether it's a successful implementation or not. We had a demo suite set up for members of our organisation to come in and use it prior to actually being released. We had training programs, but getting their buy-in will open their minds to the processes that they can use it for. They'll go back to their department managers and said, we've seen this. This is the way we work now. Perhaps we could work slightly different. It'll open their eyes to the ways that UC can actually...
An important part of it from your story is to make sure that the people who are selling you it come in and make it work so that people can see it working.
Indeed. You've got to get the relationship with your third-party vendors together and right from the start.
All right, last word to you, Dale. Are they talking sense so far?
Yeah, I'd echo all of that. But what I would say from a business case point of view is you need to go through all of that stuff involving the users, but then you need to turn the whole thing on its head when you make the business case, because at the end of the day, it's not about keeping the users happy only. Obviously, that's an important part of the whole equation. It has to make sense in business.
There has to be something, some financial justification.
So go through that, translate all those behavioural changes that we've just been talking about into what does that mean for the business in terms of cost savings, reduced process overheads, and all those kinds of things.
OK, that's great. Thank you very much. Well, that's something to be getting on with anyway for you. That'll keep you busy until the next, until our next episode of a story of your unified communications implementation. Next time round, we'll be moving away from the planning stage and be looking at what happens when you get your hands dirty and you have to install this stuff, get it working. What are the problems you're going to encounter then, and how do you solve them? So thank you to all of the team. And I've been Tim Phillips, and we'll see you next time.